We're coming to the end of the year, and Anthony Albanese has released a video giving his reflections on 2023. Strangely enough, he didn't mention The Voice or his recent holiday tour of wineries, but he did say he's been doing a lot on cost of living.
Please.
Families are feeling pressure. As a government, our main focus has been on delivering cost of living relief while taking pressure off inflation. Around 1.2 million families are receiving cheaper childcare. We helped up to 5 million households and small businesses with rebates on their energy bills. Real wages have increased for the last 2 quarters.
Incredibly inspiring. Paul, if you had to summarise Elbow's year in one word, what word would you use?
Elbow. And you can read into that exactly what you will. Is it a swear word? Is it a bad word? Of course, it's been terrible. Look, he started off the year with, I think very much the sense of Australians with the PM at the moment is a little bit like the Voice polling. Like towards the start of the year, 60-40, pretty easy. We thought everything was semi-set in stone about who was in charge, who wasn't. That's dramatically changed over the year. But I'll just say about that video, and I get it, he's hardly going to turn around and point out the failures. But he seems like he is trapped in the prime ministerial bubble, and all of them at some point get pulled into it. Some go in a little earlier and some go in a little bit later. It's when you start to talk about things in the big number version of things, because it sounds impressive at the meeting to say 1 million this or 4 billion that or 2.5 billion that. Reality is one-on-one. And as you saw in the newspapers today, 1 in 3 people are pulling back on the amount of Christmas presents they're buying. That's the reality of Australia going into this Christmas and saying we've done this much on childcare, and this is a version of the same speech. The reality is they've been sitting on a surplus the whole time and they've done nothing for the vast swathe of people. So one word, elbow.
Danica, were you inspired by the video? Did it make you feel pride in Australia and think this government's got it all under control?
Please. Look, honestly, the guy's kidding himself. No, it absolutely did not make me feel like that. I actually think it's a complete insult to the people who are struggling to pay their own bills. They don't know whether or not they're going to be able to keep the lights on or if they're going to be able to feed their children. As Paul said, there's currently a surplus. What are they doing with it? This week they spoke about their MyEFO figures, which were better than expected, as we know. Well, why not share the love around? Why not actually go out there and help people instead of these pre-recorded video messages? It was a shocker.
Oh, shame on you. You thought he was having a terrible year. I watched that video. The government's going great. And we didn't even see all of it. That goes on for another 1 minute and 45 seconds.
You were inspired by it, Joe. You were inspired by it.
No, well, I think, to be honest, obviously the government has not had a great year, particularly the last half of it. And I've said that, been very upfront about that, and blind Freddie could see it. Doesn't need me to say it. But
your body language does tell us you don't know. It's great. I've been watching you on all these shows, and you started up here, and now he's down here at the end of the year saying, please let it in.
Defeated.
There's a couple of things I would say. Sometimes you do kind of have to remind people that it's not the end of the world, that there's hope in sight, that there is help that either is on the way or has been given, even if they might not necessarily have felt it, just from a purely politicking and PR and spin point of view. The difficulty, though, is that the worst thing you can do in that, and if there is a sort of Shakespearean flaw in the video, the worst thing you do, and Paul sort of touched on, and say, we have done this, we have done that. What you want to be saying to people is, you have got this, you have got that. So every Australian under 80 grand a year has received 1,500 in free childcare or something like that, because that's how people themselves think. So it's not what we, the government, have done. It's what you, the citizen, have achieved or got thanks to us, the government. And that's the difference between Donald Trump's campaign and Hillary Clinton's campaign in the 2016 election. Donald Trump kept talking about what he was going to do for America, and Hillary Clinton famously said, I'm with her, was telling Americans to pledge allegiance to her. Yeah. And so, again, you've got to, and it's very easy for people to do. And again, first-term governments are always on the training wheels, but you never talk about what you've done. You talk about how much better off people are under you. And that is I acknowledge that is a very difficult sell at the moment.
What do you think of it, Evelyn?
Oh, look, I think the guy who did the background music needs to get a pay rise. It was pretty epic. Like, can you imagine them with the headphones on and the piano going, how can I uplift Albo's message so people can hear it? But look... They
were going to use circus music, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
In the YouTube video. That's
later in the show.
That's later on. We'll get to that.
But I think he could have turned around his defeats, because I mean, like you mentioned, Paul, like you're not going to mention your defeats, like you don't mention the things that you have a loss with, right? But what he could have done is turn the whole divisiveness about the voice around and say, look, at least the will of the people was heard this year. You know, like the Australian people at least got to participate in making decisions for themselves, as opposed to deadbeat politicians making it for them. And it could have been turned around, it could have been a little bit better, and it could have been speaking to the other half of the country that he alienated.
But also, we're sort of burying the lead, right? Now, I understand, you know, the Queen's Christmas message, right? But that's on Christmas Day, right? The 2 weeks to go, like, who are these things for, right? I get that it's just to sort of fill the machine of noise, but sometimes, and you know, Joe and I talk about this all the time, and as it was with ScoMo, it is with Albo, which is their assumption is throw more me at it and that'll eventually work. Sometimes less me is the way through with a politician. One of the joys of an Australian summer is a tune out. So I'm not suggesting that this is a political fail, the decision to make the video, but sometimes you've got to turn around and go, okay, how much, like, is there an opportunity for less me today?
I think the government...
I think the parts about the bushfires and the Matildas win, the actual big events of the year, I think that is critical to mention.
On that, right, so he starts the video, he says, the Matildas inspired the nation, Australia dominated Hollywood, Vegemite turned 100.
Yeah, I mean,
and then he says,
the Vegemite comment was
it's been a big year. I'm like, if Vegemite turning 100 is one of the highlights of your year, Prime Minister.
That's true, but I think it's about uniting the nation. It's not about the me, this is what I've done, me. It's about the events that did inspire the nation, for example, the Matildas.
The Matildas finished fourth.
That was the right time.
Australia dominating Hollywood.
It doesn't matter. They still
one actress.
People were sitting in their lounge rooms watching it every night.
It was 9 seconds into the video. I was laughing at that. Those were the highlights.
He's a funny guy. But I think the answer to your question, though, is that the PM can't afford to wait for Christmas. He's got to make sure that people don't go, leave the office, sometime this week, some have already gone, just going, the bloody government, I don't know how I'm going to pay for Christmas, don't know if I've got a job next year. That's just me.
But you still can't, just because you've got a message doesn't mean you can pay for Christmas.
No, it doesn't. But it says, and you'll see, obviously you saw with the video, he acknowledges that people are doing it really tough. He's trying to say...
Yeah, but he said global inflation means people are doing it tough.
That's right. And at least he's saying, I know you're stressed, I know you're suffering, I know you're going into what's going to be a really difficult Christmas. And again, 1 in 3 people are worried about it. There's plenty of people still worried about putting food on the table day to day, let alone Christmas. But he had to, and this is the same reason they dropped that big migration announcement and also the use it or lose it investment property rules, because he had to be shown that he was listening and had to show that he was acting in a really big, easy to understand way that people understand, because otherwise they were going to go after Christmas and they were going to say, they weren't going to be able to relax.
Yeah, but the timing of that, Joe, come on, the timing of all that.
I have a better idea.
It's had months to do these, months to make these announcements.
This was the last moment.
He waited until after Parliament finishes for the year.
This was the last moment he could have done it. What I'm saying, I would have been more than happy if he'd done it sooner, but he had to do it sooner or later, and better to do it later than not at all.
What was your idea, Evelyn?
I think Pauline Hanson should put out one of her cartoons.
Yes.
I think that would be a better Christmas message.
You mentioned the fact that he didn't speak about the voice referendum at all, and fair enough, you don't want to mention your failures, but I thought what was interesting that he didn't mention anything about Indigenous affairs for next year. So suddenly Indigenous affairs having dominated the political scene for 12 months, no mention of that at all going forward. He basically should have put out a video saying, I've been working really hard to achieve bugger all. And we would have all said, yeah, well, that's honest.
At least he's honest.
Yeah, I think he just should have held Toto up and just pretended to talk through Toto, because he thinks there's something magical about that dog and there isn't.